Let's start by creating a new package. I will create resource. Resource means controller only. So I will create one controller class. I will make it as REST controller. I will take required add constructor from longbook and give it a request mapping. And make it a user. Now what I will do, I will create a simple controller that will take one request from any client and return hello world. I will add response entity, a string and test. I'll return response entity dot. I'll send OK status and then in body I'll send hello world. I'll try running this. I'll add test as well here. I'll rerun this. It is running on port 8080. I'll hit the API, localhost user test. I'm getting a response as hello world. Now what I'll do, I'll uncomment the security dependency. Now I'll rerun. Here you can see by default Spring is generating a default password for us. If I'll try hitting that API again, so here it is giving me 401, means I'm not authorized to access this particular URL. If I hit this URL in browser, it is giving me this simple login page. So from console, I'll take that generated password and I'll try with user and password. Now you can see it is redirecting me to a continue URL, but I'm getting proper response. Means by default Spring Security give us a user and random generated password, and it will secure all the URL apart from default login and logout. So these two URL is kind of not secured with Spring. It is open. Apart from whatever URL, whatever controller we are creating, all URLs will be secured by Spring Security. In last video, we discussed like the flow of the Spring Security. So basically, it starts from filter and it goes all the way down to the user details service. In between, Authentication Manager takes care of authentication provider, what type of authentication we are choosing, DAO or whatever authentication provider we are choosing. So that authentication provider will communicate with the given database. So in this case, default implementation is in-memory user detail service. So what we will do, we will override this class and give our own user. Like here we are getting a Spring generated user and a Spring generated password. So we will override this behavior. We will pass our own username and password. Let's go back to the application. Here I'll create one more package. Security, and I'll create one class. This video is purely for explaining Spring Security. After that, I'll rewrite all the things for registration and user login. So I'll make this as component, or I'll make this as configuration. I'll enable Spring Security. To work with Spring Security, we have to enable Spring Web Security, and I'll add enable method security as well, and I'll add required app constructor in case of any dependency we are adding. So this will take care of dependency injection. So what I'll do, I'll create one bean that will override default user and create a user for us. The user detail service, and here I can create a number of users. Let's say I have created user 1 with this is kind of obsoleted, so we cannot make use of default password encoder. If you make use of this default password encoder, so in that case it will not make use of any password encoder. So for now testing purpose, for the sake of knowledge, I will override this class, sorry, this method, and I'll pass username. Let's say I have created user with name Vikas and password as QWERTY. I have assigned roles as user. By default, Spring will add role here. So we will keep it as user. Otherwise, it will look like as role underscore role. Let's build this. I'll create one more user to show that we can create multiple users. Let's say I have created username as Bamika. This is my daughter name. Okay, and I have given same role as user. Now we can return both users. As you can see, our default implementation is in-memory user detail service. So I'll return in-memory user detail service from here. And internally, you can see it is implementing user detail in-memory user detail manager only. Like there are various implementation like JDBC DAO implementation, reactive user details, caching user detail service. But there is one of the implementation in memory user details manager. So we can make use of that implementation and return from here. In memory user details manager, and from here I can return list of user. user 1 and user 2. So both the user is ready for us. So I'll rerun this application. Now you can see there is no more default password being generated in the console. Now I'll refresh this page, user test. It is asking me to log in, but our default username and default password got overridden with our implementation. In this case, Vikas and quality. I'll type Vikas quality. So I can simply access this and we already overridden default behavior of Spring user detail service. Okay. Now let's try next step by adding these two, Authentication Manager and Authentication Provider. What I'll do, I'll create one more thing. And I'll create our Authentication Manager is default Authentication Manager, Provider Manager, and Authentication Provider is DAO Authentication Provider. So I'll make use of same public Authentication Manager. And it will take user detail service so that our this particular pin will be injected here. And from here, so DAO Authentication Provider. Oops. And our DAO Authentication Provider. And from here, we can add different type of password encoder, whatever we want to add, authentication. There are many other methods, like we can get data from caching, we can support different type of authentication, like in Spring Security 7 that got like last week only, like it got released. So in that we have option to set different type of multi-factor authentication as well. So those things we can do from here. We can like set principles and other things. For the sake of this video, I am overriding this so that you will be having idea like how we are setting all the different things. So in this, I'll pass this user detail service so that with this authentication provider, our user details service will be hooked up. So I'll set user detail. So default constructor got deprecated in newer version of Spring. While I was doing POC, so my version was 3 dot something and it got 4 dot something. So this is no longer valid. We cannot set user detail service in this way. We have to direct pass that user detail service from constructor. So anyway, like we were setting via setter. user detail service. Now we have to do it via this constructor. So in single line we are setting user detail service, and again from here we can return our own provider manager. And in provider manager we can pass, like we can give this provider manager, like we are making this particular authentication provider. By default authentication manager is provider manager here, so we will pass provider manager and make that new keyword, and provider manager will take our this newly created authentication provider. Other things you can set as it is. Only this user detail service got deprecated. You can see it got removed in this version. There is no default constructor with same. So here we can set all other details like user detail service, password encoder, and other things is same only. I'll make use of this extensively in next video, so you will understand more. I'll retry running this. There is nothing changed. We hooked up our own user detail service only, so behavior will be same only. Let's rerun this. User test. It is asking me to log in again. This time I will try with Vamika, the other user I created, and here you can see I am able to log in. Next is our this thing, security filter. So I'll add security filter, and before that I wanted to highlight like we are getting all the details like this thing. Here we are passing this username and password and getting it via form only. But mostly we develop a Spring Boot application and send those details from this thing, Postman or any API client. So we are not passing our username and password. Spring is by default taking control over that. So what we will do, we will create our own API that will take username and password and then do the authentication step. Okay. So this is kind of secure API, secure route. So I'll try to whitelist this route now. To enable certain URLs, we have to make use of filter, basically security filter chain. So I'll create one more bin public security filter chain. That will take HTTP security. And it will throw exception. And from here, simply I can return HTTP security, and we can pass like whatever URL we want to enable by default. So those URL we can pass. So what I'll do, I'll pass the like authorized URL, authorized HTTP request, will sort this. HTTP dot request matcher. As name suggests, request matcher will match all the requests, and whatever URL will match this particular pattern, so that pattern will be allowed. So I'll pass, we have this resource test. So I'll try to whitelist this particular URL first. So I'll pass /user/test, and I'll say that permit all whatever URL I have added in this. We can add a ton of URL, like you can pass arrays or array list as a URLs patterns, and we can permit all, and then any other request that is not matching this, means we will pass any request that is not matching this request matcher, so that will be authenticated by Spring Security. And then we will pass build. Let's retry and rerun. Now it won't ask for login for this particular URL. Okay, we can, application is running. See, it is not asking for any login. So using security filter chain, we can allow certain URL, like in future we will see, like we will allow login, we will allow register, and few more URL that will be not authenticated, that will be directly allowed for the application. So what I'll do, I'll rename this as login, and in my filter chain I'll make it as login. I'll go back to my controller, and from here I'll create my own custom login endpoint. To create my own custom login endpoint, let it be test only. I'll create one more post mapping login. Let's create responsibility. For now, generic login, and it will take, let's say it is taking like normal user class. We can pass simply two string, login and password, or we can create our own user request. Let me create one more DTO request package. And I have created user request. The same DTO I will make use of for registration as well. So here I'll take, for now I'll take only two parameters. Later I'll add first name, last name, email, and other thing. So let's say I'm taking email and password for now. So I'll add private string email, private string password, and I'll add getter and setter, getter setup. What I'll do, I'll ignore all the unknown, so that in future if I am adding registration details, means username, password, so our application won't fail. So I'm taking username, I mean email and password. So I'll add in this as request body, and here I'll pass user request. And this will return our whatever we want to return. So let's say I'm returning response entity dot okay. Maybe I am building and return something later. So this will return after authentication. We will return simple request with okay status code. So from here, basically we have to do authentication. And who is taking care of authentication part? Authentication part is taken care by our authentication manager. This will take care of authentication. So what we can do? We can simply add authentication manager, private final. I'm making it final so that this required our constructor will generate a constructor for this one. So I like private final authentication manager, and here basically I'll pass authentication manager dot authenticate. So this one is taking authentication, and this authentication is the actual object, like principals, user detail, credential. So all the details will be in that authentication only. So we have to pass authentication detail. So from where it is coming? It is coming from our this thing. From the filter we are passing username and password, that will go to provider manager. So what we can do? We can pass here username, password, authentication token, and that class is having two different type of methods. First one is taking unauthenticated, second one is taking authenticated. So authenticated is taking authorities as well, and unauthenticated is taking two different objects. One is principal and other one is credential. So from here we can pass principal and credential. Unauthenticated, and in user request we have email and password, both are string. Indirectly that is object only. So I'll get that from user request dot get email comma user request dot get password. And and I'll store this into a variable. Let's add authentication. So this is our object that is actually authenticated after authentication. Let's pass that authenticated user here in body. Authentication. Let me rerun my application. So it is giving me 401. Okay. This one is login. This one is post mapping. And in body, we have to pass JSON. And username is Vikas. And password is first name. So, yeah. So what we missed here, like by default, Spring text. 1 second. So you let me go back to this thing. This is important so that I'm commenting out. 1 second. And so you how it is working so that you will understand clearly like what we missed and why it is important actually. Application is running and we are allowing paste to undo. Let's comment this as well. See, we got a login page. I'll go to the inspect. Here in body, in form you can see this is name hidden field dot CSRF and this is hidden and we are sending some values, random values. I mean, Spring is sending some random values to prevent cross-site scripting attack. So from Postman, we are not sending that. I mean, we are not able to send that for now. That's why our earlier request was forbidden. So what I'll do, I'll disable that cross-site scripting from this application. So I'll revert the changes. I'll make the authentication provider the source also, and add everything. And in filter chain configuration, what I'll do, I'll disable cross-site CSRF. So here let's add that CSRF dot disable, and replace that with lambda abstract http configurer dot disable. Now rerun this. Now it is giving proper authenticated user, authenticated true, authorities, role user. See, role, it is appending role, and authorities, whatever authorities we have provided by default has been provided with these authorities: credential details, name, principals like account none expired, none locked, authorities. All the details by default Spring is giving. Username is Vikas. Okay. If we try something, let's say I'll try other user Vamika with wrong username. So it will fail. It will give me 403. So anything like any other URL or any exception we are getting. So by default, Spring Security will send 403. We will override this behavior in our application, but by default, if you are getting anything apart from 401, 401 means you are not authorized. Otherwise, 403, any exception means you are not authorized to do certain operations. Okay. Let me try with correct password, correct username as well. You see, I'm getting proper authenticated user. Till now, we have seen all the steps mentioned here. Like we have overridden user detail service and given our own username and password. We have taken user details from the filter. We have overridden this provider as well. But nowhere we are checking like given username or password is like actually correct or not from the like whatever we are getting from user detail service. That is still taken care by Spring Security. So for that, what we can do, we can actually now override our own authentication provider or create our own authentication provider. For now, this DAO authentication provider is taking care of everything. Like it has methods that is like doing all the retrieve user, load user by username, and then it is checking like given user is like have proper password or not. So all the details is being validated here. From user detail service, it is taking data and then it is comparing password. If password is matching, then it is simply passing that request to other internal servlet. So what we will do, we will create our own authentication provider and check this password is correct or not, username is correct or not, and based on that, we will do further logic in our own application. So what I'll do, I'll create one more class, my own, authentication provider. And I'll make it as component, and I'll add required our constructor, and that will implement authentication provider, because here this one is responsible for all the authentication. Implements authentication provider, and I will implement both methods. Here basically this authentication is coming from this one, user receives this authentication. So after this thing, it will be passed to that particular class. Let me extract this. So this is something like this: username password authentication token, internally authentication only. See, it is implementing authentication, and authentication has every other details. So from here we are passing username password authentication to authentication manager, that is our authentication provider. So we will go back to our own custom authentication provider, and here I'll simply cast this to whatever we have here, username password authentication token. This is confusing, so I'll close all other tab. I'll go back to this one. I'll create user. This is our token authentication, and I will get user detail service from here, this user detail service, so that we have our user. So this is our normal user, and user detail service is our DB user. Let's say I'll create var user from DB user detail service, and this user detail service is having different method, like only one method, load user by username. So what I can do, I can load the user using username, and our username is coming from principal only, this user. So this is like, we know we are passing not as a whole, we are passing a string only. So we will cast this to a string. A string from user get principal. And other thing is password credential, so that we will get during comparison. So we have user from database, like based on given username like what we got from user. Based on this username, we are getting data from database. Means if I provided Bhamika, so it will get data from here Bhamika, otherwise it will get Vikas if I pass Vikas. So based on given username, it is getting data. Now I will check for password. If this password and this password is matching, then we will say that yeah, we got our like authenticated user. So if user dot get credential is equal to user from db dot get password. If both are matching, in that case we have authenticated user. In this case, we have authenticated user, so we can pass all three details like credential as well. So we will pass user from DB, whatever user we got from database. Then we don't want to pass plain text as password, so we can, let's say that password is protected. And last parameter, it is taking authorities, that is granted authorities. So and pass authorities. User from DB dot get authorities. If that is not the case, like password did not match, in that case we will say that bad credential. We cannot turn this. Okay. The other method is like for telling like what type of authentication we are supporting. By default, if we make it true, means it will take all the type of authentication. So what we can do, instead of making this application heavy, we can simply return this type of authentication token for now. Username authentication token dot class is assignable from authentication. Like whatever we have is assignable from this one. Now rerun this. See, behavior is same. We are getting all the details, and here we are comparing now, like if username is correct or not. Now I'll go back to my old user details service, and here this is deprecated, so I'll remove this one and I'll try to add with username. With username. So now Spring Boot supports this way. The old method is deprecated, so I remove deprecated behavior so that you will get all the updated information, and retry running this. Now we are getting forbidden. So error is clear. Given there is no default password encoder, like we did not configure the password encoder, so it is assuming like each password must have password encoding prefix, or otherwise we have to pass no, like it is there is no encoder in the default encoding to delegate this behavior. So what I'll do, I'll simply pass this no, that we are not making use of any encoder. Now again behavior is same. I'm getting authenticated user with all the user. See? So this is the basic of Spring security. Without this foundation, we won't be able to proceed further. So I have explained everything that is needed for now. In next video, I'll try to register, create registration first, and then we will implement login flow.